Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Adobo and Avocados. I am Nicole van der Hoeven, and you may notice that my usual co host, Marie Cruz, isn't here today. And that's because she had better things to do on a Friday night, which I'm a little sore about. But I do luckily have a new co host for today.
Hi, my name is Lina. So Marie has changed. She looks a little bit different today. I'm very glad to join you here today. And I'm glad also to talk to someone that I actually pretty much know, the Stevie, or the Mr. Steve Upton.
Which is me. Hello, I'm Steve. How do I follow that introduction? Yeah, I'm Steve. Shall I do the full introduction? I don't know how you usually do
Yeah,
this.
sure.
So I'm, as mentioned, Steve. I am a principal QA consultant at Thoughtworks. We're a professional services software consultancy. I'm based out of Germany, but originally from some combination of Wales and the UK and Ireland.
Awesome. And Lynn has actually been on here before, but I believe it's the first time for you. So welcome, Steve.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Lena, for the people who didn't catch that episode with you, can you refresh their memory as to what you like to do?
Yes, thank you so much. I was so excited about Steve that I forgot to introduce myself.
I actually
So I'm
forgot to say
originally
what I do
actually
too. So
Yeah. I'm originally Lithuanian. I've lived in Germany for quite a bit, and that's where I worked with Steve actually in ThoughtWorks. But I've changed the job since then, and I'm working as an independent quality consultant. Yeah, that's about it. So recently I moved back to Lithuania. I work a lot with process, with QA, but more with this like whole team quality approach. I believe this is the future, this is the way to go, which means there's lots of topics like facilitation that we need to concentrate on. It's not only writing some selenium tests, which sometimes we may fall into a trap at the start of our careers.
Steve, it sounds like you are both consultants. You have the word consultant in your titles at least. But what does a principal consultant at ThoughtWorks do?
A little bit of everything, at least in my case. Officially, my job title says principal QA consultant. I'm quite often brought into um, that sort of the sort of thing which Lina described, actually. So helping build out that whole team approach to quality. But I've also taken on a lot of other roles over the years. I've played a sort of advisory role. I've been an architect, a technical principal, a developer, a business analyst, and of course a facilitator. So kind of a little bit of everything. Yeah, very much. I very much identify as a generalist. So.
I wonder how your career progression has been because I started, for example, in a very traditional tester role. How was it for you? Because now you're, I guess, moving away a little bit from this QA aspect because maybe at some point you were like, okay, this is not just testing, it's a lot of other topics to tackle. What was the journey there?
So my background was I studied computer science. Pretty generic degree. I jumped into my first job outside of university was the IBM graduate scheme. And the way that works is once you kind of get through the process, they just kind of drop you in a random team with a random job. And my first job, my first assignment was something tester, or maybe a systems tester, or an integration tester. And I had absolutely no idea about testing. I think in my entire degree, I'd had maybe one kind of half-assed lecture on testing and quality. So that was a whole new field for me. Didn't really know what to do. But I had a really good mentor, a really good team lead at the time. And I found myself really enjoying it, being able to kind of build on some of my technical background, but also explore a space that I ended up finding really interesting. And then since then, I think I've just sort of been saying yes to everything and finding myself in strange new roles and job titles. And so I still identify as a QA, very much a generalist. Um, we'll see where I end up next.
Actually, there
Yeah.
is this visual. I don't know, Nicole, if you've seen it as well. The Thoughtworks created a visual of the role of different roles, and it was not created by a QA, but actually QA is in the center because you could branch off, and your role overlaps with so many other roles. That's why I think I always liked being a QA, because you can sort of branch off and show other areas, and nobody will say anything because you say, okay, it's part of my job as well.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I mean, my background has been in performance testing. I talk a lot now about observability and DevOps, and my title is developer advocate. So it's I don't know. I think this is one of the things that you and I talked about, Steve, initially at a traffic light on the way to meet Lina, actually. We were talking about how at a certain point these roles start to lose their meaning, because really we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to improve the quality, or however you define that. There are different ways to chop up quality of the systems that we're building, and it really stops to matter at a certain point whether you're doing that on the code side or environment side or testing or a combination of all of those.
Yeah, that's something I really identify with. You've got your classic Gantt chart, your classic sort of visualization of waterfall, requirements, design, development, testing, release, all of that, right? And that's, even if we ignore the simplicity of that, when your release and your deployment cycle is on the order of hours and days, separating those things out into nice, clean sections is something that just simply doesn't make sense. So there's this necessary blurring between them. And as you said, particularly with this looking at live systems, right? Maybe my tests passed. Maybe my CI pipeline, my deployment pipeline, gave me the thumbs up and everything's live, but I still need to care about whether or not it's live 5 minutes after deployment, 10 minutes after deployment. I need to be able to understand that, visualize that, debug that. So yeah, this shift left and shift right is sometimes how we think about it. But when that loop is so tight and all those things are happening all the time, it's just, yeah, I see them as just all getting blurred together.
Well, before we get into facilitation, I do want to ask you a question that we usually like to ask our guests at the beginning of every episode. And the show is called Adobo and Avocados because Marie and I are senior developer advocates. And it's called adobo because adobo is a dish, a Filipino dish. We're both Filipino. And adobo is one of those kind of touchstones of Philippine cuisine where it's not like it's so good, but it is so definitively homey. And it's something that you can make anywhere. So the question is, when you are feeling a little bit unsettled, or you just feel like you need something that centers you or reminds you of home, what is your adobo? That could be a food or an activity or an item, or it could be something that's just for this week too.
I can have a go at that. The UK. So I grew up in the UK, mostly in Wales. The UK is not well known for its food. I like it gets a lot of bad rap, if we're going to be very honest here.
Yeah.
And I think that is somewhat true, and also maybe a little bit misplaced. Like there is some really nice hearty food in British cuisine. If it's done well, it can be a great, lovely meal. In Germany now, and Germany has basically the same thing of not widely regarded for its food, but there's a lot of heavy, tasty, hearty food in there. So I think a lot of that kind of gets covered by German food. But the one thing I can't find is fish and chips, like a really good fish and
Oh,
chips.
yeah.
Um, like
That's
you
an
can buy
Australian
it,
thing too.
yeah, you can buy it in Germany, but it's not the same as like a proper British chippy. So maybe that.
Yeah. What about you, Lina?
I actually answered this and I forgot what I answered before.
Well,
Which
you can
is,
just say what it is this week or
yeah,
today.
what is this week? It's a good question.
I can do mine while you're
Yeah, go ahead.
thinking. I bought a Remarkable 2, which is an e-ink tablet, and I thought like it's going to change the way I take notes. What it's actually done is it's made me go back to actual pens and actual paper because I'm not finding the hybridness of it very very compelling. But yeah, I'm feeling like I'm really enjoying, the tactility of actually writing with a physical fountain pen and just enjoying the feel of pen on paper. So that's something that's been centering me this week.
Yeah, that's a good practice, actually. Yeah, journaling. It's funny. Actually, I have this book, which is a 5-year journal. So every day I have a question. You too? What?
These aren't journals. These are just random notes, to be fair.
Yeah.
So for
So is
me,
that
I
yours
think,
as well?
sorry, what?
Is that yours as well?
I do like journaling. That does ground me, I think. But one thing popped up into my head, which is plants. I love some little house gardening activities. And I just moved to a new apartment. I got the keys yesterday. So it's a little bit empty and sad. I need new plants. And I think
Aw.
plants make me feel more like at home.
No, I don't know
Okay.
if you recognize this plant.
Oh, yes. Did I?
Yeah, this is a plant you gifted me many years ago.
Lovely.
Still here.
My
Still
only
here.
plant is a Lego orchid.
Oh,
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's get into facilitation. Steve, can you tell us how you would define facilitation?
Oof. I don't think I have a single definition of facilitation, but I think there's a couple that I dislike.
Okay.
I read somewhere that the role of a facilitator is to resolve conflict, right? You've got people who disagree with each other, and you're trying to resolve that conflict, and or bring alignment or something like that. And those things absolutely have their place. Sometimes, yeah, like it's useful to bring some alignment to a group of people. Sometimes it is useful to kind of like deal with a conflict. But I kind of see the role of a facilitator is to embrace conflict, is to take those disagreements between people, take the different perspectives, and get something useful out of them. Having a big workshop, having a big meeting is expensive, right? You've got all these people together and the facilitator, of course. You want to get something useful out of that. There's a phrase I like called agonism. I don't know if you know the word agonism, which refers to conflict but positive aspects of a conflict that leads to something positive. And I kind of see the role of a facilitator and good facilitation to turn antagonism into agonism, something where we can benefit from those different perspectives.
I really like actually that. First of all, I love unpopular opinions. I love disagreements on and questioning sometimes defaults or standards, right? Thinking about facilitation and resolving conflicts, when I hear it, I'm like, that's a lot of sort of responsibility poured onto this facilitator because it's people that should solve the conflicts themselves. And maybe the facilitator just helps them understand something on the way, right? So I think a good facilitator maybe makes you realize something you didn't know. But I wonder, can you always have a useful outcome? Or can you be such a good facilitator that wherever you go, it's always a useful outcome? Because still the participants in the discussion influence the outcome a lot.
Of course. It's absolutely possible to fail. I've certainly failed to kind of reach good outcomes before, of course. I do remember a workshop I facilitated a couple of years ago, where one half of the room hated the other half of the room. There's two departments that were kind of at war with each other.
Did you make them like each other because you're resolving all the conflict?
I,
He
I don't
made
think
them
I've
hate each
resolved.
other more.
I don't think I've resolved all of those conflicts. Of course not, right? Which is why I don't see it as my responsibility or the responsibility of a facilitator just to like make everyone happy. Like, if you disagree, if you have a different perspective, that doesn't mean that one person's perspective is wrong and the other person's perspective is right, and we need to find the correct one, or even that there is some happy middle ground where they're all going to be happy. It might be that you reach, depending on the constraints you have around you, it might be that you are unable to reach something positive there. Sure, but I do think that the role of a facilitator and how you can kind of play with this is to create the context, to create the situation, the environment that allows those positive things to emerge. And fundamentally, well, particularly when we're talking about complex systems and complex facilitation, one of the key principles is you don't know what the end state will be when you start that journey. And it might be that you get two groups of people in a room with such completely opposing opinions, all of that history, grudges, whatever, that there just isn't really a way for something positive to emerge. But what you can do is you can build the context, the constraints around them, to make it more likely to emerge, or at least to figure out your next steps.
I kind of think of facilitation as the process of creating a space for people to discuss a topic and enabling them to make some sort of decision about it. But what that decision is can really vary depending on the type of workshop that you want to facilitate. A friend of mine, Andy Pillane, has a course on workshop facilitation. I just put it in the comments, but also put it in the description. And he talks about three typical goals for workshops and facilitation in general. And he talks about them being generation, alignment, and evaluation. So, generation is like, we don't really know how to solve a problem. We just need to come up with ideas for how to solve it. Let's all get together and explore that. And alignment is like, maybe some people have an idea of where to go, or maybe they all have an idea of what direction to head in, but they're not sure how exactly to get there, or maybe they have slightly different goals that maybe can overlap. It's like getting people on the same page so that they can do something collaboratively. And then evaluation is like, here are our options. How do we know which way to go? And that's like, you could even do some testing on that. So I think like there are different goals for a workshop, and the way that you facilitate that workshop is going to differ depending on what kind of workshop it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I one of the things that influences me a lot is this concept of complex facilitation, and some of the principles behind that. I try and apply them in most of the stuff, in most of the facilitation that I do. But yeah, there are always different contexts, different types of workshops, and sometimes, as powerful as some of these complex facilitation techniques are, sometimes you just like, it's just useful to kind of get people aligned. As much as I might malign that word alignment, sometimes it is needed, and there's other ways of looking at facilitation, as you mentioned, these different types of workshops, different goals.
I wonder what is complex facilitation.
So it's a collection of principles and methods, kind of budding out of Cynefin and complexity science, that looks at, well, if we consider people to be, people and teams and organizations to be complex systems, well, that gives us a certain baseline. That gives us an amount of unpredictability, right? We can't say for certain exactly what's going to happen. It gives us dispositionality, where we don't, where even though we can't make deterministic statements, if I do X, Y will happen, but I can start to say, well, this might be more likely or this might be less likely. And there's a couple of kind of key principles which then inform the facilitation techniques in this body, like, managing the process but not the people. So not having the facilitator be someone who is driving towards an outcome, You let the people drive that outcome. You just create the space, as Nicole said, around them for that. Avoiding premature convergence, where you kind of converge on an idea too quickly, and instead what you try and do is you try and maintain ambiguity as long as possible, because that allows people to explore the space.
Sounds good, but how? Because I feel like you show up to the discussion, you already have your point, right? You're like, oh, I want us to do this. And then how do you have this ambiguity in the room, the space where anything could happen?
And that's what
Well, I
all
kind
the
of think that one way that we can look at this is through a theory of play. And when we think about, there's an idea of homo ludens being that one of the things that differentiates us from other animals is our ability to play and play seriously. And one of the prerequisites of play is rules, because if we just wanted to get the thing done, then we would just do it and there would be no play. We create structures around this play so that it can be play. And maybe that's where we would start. When you want to have some sort of workshop that is separate from like a meeting, which is very much like get the thing done, a workshop is more exploratory. You don't really exactly know what the outcome is going to be. There are some that you hope for, but there is an element of play. And I think we need to start by setting up those boundaries. Who's going to be invited? How long is it going to be for? Who shouldn't be invited? What kinds of people are going to be there? Is that also where you would start, Steve?
Yeah, very much so. This, as you say, setting up boundaries. I would see that as the sort of key role of the facilitator, right? To set those constraints around the process, which then, of course, creates that space inside those constraints where the interesting things can emerge. And then there's a series of techniques. There's play itself, like as a technique is fantastic in facilitation. So there's a technique I love, which is called future backwards, kind of in this sort of body of methods, right? And the idea. So you've heard of forecasting, right? We cast our view forward. We look forward, right? We're predicting something, and we have retrospectives where we cast our view backwards. We're backcasting. Future backwards is a technique of side casting. So it's a series of processes. You start by kind of imagining your current state. You structure the exercises so people kind of get those ideas out there. You might mix them up with other people so they don't get to see the whole view. Then you ask them to imagine an impossibly good future state and an impossibly bad future state, and map out kind of how they got there. And there's a lot of kind of sub techniques in that for just keeping their minds open and kind of maintaining that ambiguity. And because of how you've structured it, you've built these sort of alternate timelines, and you're asking them to look not forward as a prediction, which is kind of bound by reality, and not backwards, which is, of course, also bound by reality, but look to kind of alternate presence. What could be in maybe another timeline, which is fundamentally not real. We know that can't happen. So it's by it not being real, it pushes us more into this play state. It's a game. It forces people to think in this way. And that's, again, those boundaries, those constraints put people in a position where they can't help but have their mind open.
So maybe it would be useful to think about like a concrete example of in what cases, because we're all in QA and facilitation doesn't really come up that often, and I think that it should. What are some situations that you both have experienced where facilitation was a necessary skill to have?
Let's see. Most recently, I did a workshop on, well, actually, a month or so ago, I did a future backwards, which I really enjoyed. We used the whole wall. It was very big, very fun. Something I do relatively regularly is workshops to set up things like definitions of done or definitions of ready, or define our process. That's an active facilitation. I could just sit down, come up with a definition of done, announce it to the team, and say, this is our new process now. Okay, let's go. Maybe I get some sign off, right? If I get enough thumbs up in Slack, then it's live. But that's not facilitation, right? I think because these processes are used by the team, they're absolutely integral to how the team works. They benefit the team, or they should. They're also a burden on the team. They're things that the team needs to do or should be doing, ideally. So that consent and that buy-in and that co-creation by the team is absolutely critical there. So yeah, I think a facilitation skills in setting these things up, building quality into the process through all of these things, being able to create a space where the team can co-create that is absolutely critical, because otherwise someone just came in and told us what the process is, and that's not the same thing.
I also feel that facilitation plays a huge part in collaboration overall, because if we are working with people, we need to know how to deal with people. And facilitation is one of the crucial skills for that. Recently, I had a conversation with Alan Page, who is a creator of modern testing principles. And the whole idea of it was that the role of a tester is changing. It's no more just a box that you just test, that it's a little bit different, right? And when I asked him, Nicole went away because the camera turned off. Okay, she's back.
He's back, we're good.
We were told that it has a time of half an hour, right? So in half an hour, you will see another dark screen, but Nicole is still there. Or Nicole
not
is
like
an
I do
AI
this for a
creation. We don't
living.
know. So Alan Page created modern testing principles, and the role of a tester is changing. And when I asked him, what is the main skill you would tell testers to learn? He said facilitation. And I fully agree with
Wow.
that, because I think also working in a consultancy with Steve, that is what I ended up doing so much as well. Because frequently I found myself as a QA, sort of as a team glue, right? Or bridging different people together because someone misunderstood something. Because as QA, sort of, you try to get the big picture of what's happening. And facilitation was something I did a lot, especially with process conversations, like what's even our story life cycle, definition of done, definition ready. The most recent example I would have is that I joined a new project, and the whole idea of quality was very fluffy. We didn't have any kind of what is quality for this product, because it's open source. And what I did was I had a workshop. So I facilitated a workshop on quality. So I divided people into groups, and we were brainstorming on what quality means to them. And it ended up being a super fun session. People haven't collaborated in those ways for a long time. And the outcome we got, it was a lot. It was diverse. It had so many important points that it was extremely inspiring. And then when eventually we created a little quality manifesto, it was so great to share it, and people were a part of it. So they had a buy-in. They were like, okay, we want to go towards that. So I feel like if we are talking about quality overall, we have to understand what it is and align on it. And maybe I'm even not personally thinking of a certain aspect, but you are. And if we have a nice meeting and we're facilitating it nicely, we could get this information there and just enhance and make this whole vision much better.
Yeah, I'm sensing a theme here because what I was also going to say was something around requirements. Because often I would get called in and they just say, well, we want you to make it faster. I'm like, well, what does faster mean? Which part do you want to make faster? Faster for whom? There are all these questions. And it wasn't one person or one team that had those answers. And it wasn't a clear cut answer. A lot of these things were very subjective. And so what I had to do is get everybody in the same room, different people too from different teams, and all the stakeholders had to be represented, and then all come to a joint definition of what exactly are we wanting when we say we want this to be faster. How do we quantify that? What is more, are there some things that are more important than others? Is it okay that some things are slower if other things are faster? Like, those sort of nuances have to be teased out. And I think probably this is, now that we're talking, this might be one of the things that makes facilitation particularly important a skill for testers, because quality is so amorphous. Like, there is no one definition. It is always within a context. And if you don't discuss that context, then you're going to end up with wildly different ideas of what good looks like.
Yeah,
It
that.
reminds me actually of the article me and Steve wrote about asking questions
Oh yeah.
on Thoughtworks blog.
Yeah.
We wrote an article with maybe 7 or 10, I don't know how many questions there were. We could find it and share that you can ask your team. And at some point, I also had question asker on my business card. So QA for me was question
That's
asker.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that point you made about subjectivity, right? We all have different views on definitions of quality or what good looks like or bad looks like, is really, really important. One of the key insights from complex complexity science is that whenever we're working with a complex system, we cannot understand all of it, so we have to take a view on it. We have to draw a border and say, okay, this is what we're considering. We never have this global perfect view, so no view is privileged, and that's again this role of facilitation, is bringing out those different views, understanding as much of those different perspectives as possible, so we can figure out the next steps. And that might be that we agree collectively that, okay, practically we're going to go with this definition, or maybe we do lay them all out and say, look, this is what we're going to keep in mind going forward. That's the wonderful thing about not knowing how things are going to end when you go in.
I think the more you know, the more you're doubting everything. And
Yeah.
working in testing, you are somehow letting go of control the more years you have, the more experience you have. Because first of all, you're sort of this, like, if we start in a traditional way, right? You're a box or a status, right? And then you're like, okay, there's much more than that. There's a reason why this bug is there. And sometimes a deeper reason why it's there. And you realize that if we actually want to make an impact on quality, it's much more than you just providing feedback in this like late stage in the product development cycle. It's having those conversations which are complex, which are difficult. And sometimes now I find myself that I'm less likely to just give a quick decision right now than I was at the start of my career. Maybe I had like stricter opinions then, because I would be like, oh, yes, I'm the gatekeeper, it's just me. But now I'm like, maybe I don't understand something here and what's there. And once you start having those conversations, it's so hard to reach the decision sometimes. But I guess that's the only way to make a good product, because we want those diverse opinions to be in. Because me alone, I don't want to be accountable for everything. I don't want to be the gatekeeper. I feel like, yeah, this is a teamwork for us to build a good product.
That's real quick. That's a really good point. This making more let's say snap decisions kind of earlier in your career, right? As you kind of get this wider view and this broader understanding, you realize that these decisions, even small decisions, can have lasting impact. So it's good, it's important to explore it. I was talking to someone in my team a couple of weeks ago and about this challenge and how they find a way to kind of trade off between needing sometimes to make a concrete decision because we need to go forward, and exploring and getting all of those perspectives. There is a need for some pragmatism there. Running a workshop for every tiny design decision is probably not the best use of everyone's time. So really getting that experience and getting that understanding to to say, okay, this sort of problem here, this sort of decision is something where we really, really do need to maintain that ambiguity and figure out a way forward. This is a smaller thing. Maybe we just make a choice. It's reversible, things like that. So
maybe this is where experiments come in, right? I know that Steve has an interest in experiments.
been designing several, yeah, exactly, and that's exactly it, right? So the distinction here between a plan and an experiment is you plan, right? We write down a story, right? As a user, I want a feature so that I can achieve something, right? Some task is framed in terms, they're typically framed in terms of outputs and outcomes, right? We're going to build this thing and then we're going to get this thing. Whereas experiments are explicitly hypotheses to test. We don't know if they're going to work. The goal of an experiment is to get some information, some feedback, some data, something to help us take that next step afterwards. So yeah, it's and that can be a really valuable outcome from facilitation, from working with groups, is not a plan we've all aligned on, but a series of coherent experiments that we're willing to try and willing to kind of manage the risks of.
I find the differences between your approach and mine, Steve, so telling, because you're very like experimental and hypotheses, and there's a systematic approach to it, and I'm just like, let's play. Let's see what happens.
It's the
And let's just let
same.
it
Come
wide
on.
open. Exactly. It's like it's the same thing, but a different approach. It's
Different
a
articulations.
different nuance to it. Yeah. It's really interesting. But I also wonder sometimes if maybe the most important thing to a workshop or a successful facilitation begins by selecting the players. Who gets to play? Who do you invite and who do you not invite? How do you decide that?
I can give the classic consultant answer of it depends.
Oh, come on. Give us the
We should have
real
a drinking game. How many times we will hear that?
Of course, right. So you want different perspectives, right? You want people who, if you're running something about, say, business process, right? You might, or like how an organization runs. Just hypothetically, I've run things like that before. It would be really good to get two different groups, or to make sure that you at least have representation from the workers, the people kind of down at the coalface, down on the line, and the management, for example. The value of getting those different perspectives is you get to kind of smash them against each other, right? Get that agonism out of that out of those different perspectives. And then it's the job of the facilitators to create that space where they need to engage with different perspectives. There's a technique from complex facilitation known as the standard question, right? Where you ask two groups, you split people up, and the kind of standard way you would split people up into groups would be, you just split them up randomly. But I would say try and create groups that are as different as possible, right? So you put all of the managers in one group and all of the team members in the other group, as an example. You give them the exact same task. Ask them to describe some process, ask them, do a future backwards, whatever. But the key thing is you give them the same task, and then you get them to look at each other's answers, and you ask them three questions, which is what was the same, what was different, and what surprised you. So they get to see where are they aligned. They get to see maybe the things where they're disagreeing, and the things that maybe they had complete blind spots around. So you're creating that situation where because they've gone through that process as well, they have no option but to engage with that other perspective. But as to who not to invite, you can have people who are just simply closed to new ideas, who are really stuck in their ways, and that can be a real challenge as a facilitator. There is an extremely difficult technique that I have tried to. This was recommended to me by Dave Snowden a couple of years ago, and I have used this, and it succeeded, luckily. But the idea is that you kick off in the the start of the workshop with absolutely no introductions, right? Your standard thing is to give a nice introduction. Here's our agenda. Here's our plan for the day. Here's the outcomes, all of that lovely stuff. And instead, you don't do any of that. You throw them directly into the first activity with no warning, no preparation, no nothing. And people who are really closed-minded will self-select out. They will refuse to engage with that sort of thing. And congratulations, you have now they have self-selected, and you have solved one problem. That's risky though. Be careful with that one.
Yeah. I also really like the book Game Storming. I'm putting it in the comments as well. Where they talk about the differences in the type of activity and where it falls within the workshop. So it could be that, for example, at the beginning of a workshop, you often want divergent thinking, where you want them to be different. You want to show them how diverse their perspectives are. You want all the options on the table. At some point, you're going to have to choose some of them and explore those more important ones. And that's when you start getting into emergent thinking, where people start to think about how we can combine these options or maybe come up with an entirely new one. Then at the end, it kind of narrows down a little bit, where ideally you would have something more convergent, where that doesn't have to be an exact next step, but it could be like an approach that you're choosing. And depending on where you are, you might want to ratchet up that tension or ratchet up that conflict for the good of the entire process.
Absolutely, yeah. An old colleague of mine, Fred George, the way he puts it is panic is productive, actually. So yeah, sometimes putting people in uncomfortable or or at the very least unfamiliar contexts can be a really powerful technique. Novelty, we the parts of our brain that kind of fire up when we have novel experiences, and that can be a really powerful thing to play with and to try and induce. Like, think about the concept of an offsite, right? You work in the same office or the same, whether it's a home or a real office, every week. You've got meeting rooms there. Why would you go off-site for a workshop? The value I would see in that is novelty. You're in a new space. You are actively like, oh, what's going on? And that just purely that alone can be really valuable.
So what you're saying is make them uncomfortable.
Consent is obviously really important, and some techniques are genuinely quite difficult, and I would consider it an ethical responsibility as a facilitator to kind of warn people about what is about to happen. But at the same time, putting people in unfamiliar, novel situations, things that push them maybe a little bit out of their comfort zone in a way that can be managed, is really valuable. I mean, you all know the
Yeah.
cliche, right? You learn things outside of your comfort zone, right? That goes for like learning skills, but it also goes for like learning and just taking in new information. We expand our scanning range when things are new and exciting.
I could see that going to a new location that's very exciting could make you a little bit less grumpy or in your own old ways, right? More creative, likely. What are some other ways that you could think of to sort of create this uncomfortable state, which is not too maybe intrusive, but helps the team and the people to actually, I don't know, be a little bit more creative, a little bit out of their ways and contribute more?
Oof, plenty of things. I mean, one of my favorite techniques, and this is actually the one that is very difficult and that you've got to be very careful with and make sure that you've got that you appropriately warn the participants kind of what's going to happen, is ritual descent, which both of you I've talked with about. The idea is that rather than trying to kind of soften feedback, you have someone present an idea, and then you have a group of people who are explicitly instructed to tear that idea apart. They are not allowed to say anything positive about the idea. They are only allowed to criticize it or potentially offer suggestions for improvements, but nothing positive. And that's really, really difficult and potentially quite uncomfortable if you're the sort of person who holds grudges, or if you've put a lot of your heart and soul into an idea. And that's why the facilitation technique sets up a space to make that a little bit safer. But the sheer unfamiliarity of that really enhances the quality of the listening. So the typical way you would do it is you would put on a mask, or possibly turn with your back to the group who's doing the criticizing, doing the dissenting. And honestly, that has been when I've been the person who's getting their idea attacked. I have never listened better in my life, because it was such a novel, interesting experience. The act of silent listening, not waiting to planning your next thing to say, improves the quality of the listening. So that can be quite uncomfortable and difficult, but really, really powerful if done well.
I think it's so important that there's a ritual part of it, because without the ritual of dissent, then it can come across as very personal. If I say something bad about your idea, I'm just attacking, maybe you would feel that I'm just attacking you. But having that ritual means there's a separation there. I also really like the idea from Edward Bono of having these six thinking hats. And he didn't phrase it in this way, but his idea was that some people could have an actual hat that they put on. And one of those hats could be like, let's look at the facts. Or another hat could be like, let's look at the emotions part of it. And maybe there could be a hat for dissent. And that's like a visual indicator of you not being the person that is attacking someone. You are playing the role. And it kind of makes me think of like tabletop role playing games where there's a dungeon master or a games master that is throwing out monsters to kill you. Why is that acceptable? Because we know it's a role. We know that this person isn't doing that to us. It's the rules of the game make it so that they must do that to us, and that's why it's acceptable.
Yeah, this I like this idea of thinking hats, right? Different hats, because that ritual point that you mentioned of putting on a hat, that actually has research backing it. So when a surgeon puts on their scrubs and prepares to go into the operating theater, the ritualization of that, I put on my scrubs, I wash my hands. There is a different cognitive activation there, essentially becoming a different person. You can measure and test this. Similarly, if you look at, say, the military, right? The drilling and the uniform and the uniformity and the ritual that goes into it activates different parts of your brain and has a powerful effect. So even rituals like graduation ceremonies, award ceremonies, and things like that, right? It's the ritual brings with it changes. The ritual is very, very powerful in terms of changing things.
I'm aware that I've put a lot of book recommendations, but I'm going to give another one, and it's the book Quit by Annie Duke. And in it, she talks about how we are just predisposed to not want to quit because our society prizes perseverance, even if we really shouldn't, and unduly penalizes people who quit. A quitter is being called a quitter is not usually a good thing. People usually think that that means you have no fortitude, or you give up at the first sign of trouble. But you know what? Quitting is an actual skill. And she talks about the cognitive biases that go into our decision of whether or not to stick to something, to grit it out, or to quit. And the reason that we need dissent is to shake us out of those cognitive ruts. We need someone that she calls a quitting coach, whose specific job is to tell you why you should not do a thing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but sometimes we just need someone to give us that hard feedback. And there has to obviously be a lot of trust between the two of you, because the person that is being the quitting coach might also not be too comfortable with telling somebody that they have to quit something that they might personally feel is a worthwhile endeavor to keep at.
I love this idea, actually. I think another skill that we do not appreciate as much is saying no. A person who says no honestly, when they say a yes, it really means something. And sometimes we work in companies where people just say yes all the time. And I guess the worst groups that I would facilitate are the ones that agree with everything, but actually they don't agree with anything. This is terrible. So I guess having some kind of differentiation that is not me, but I have to say something can really help unravel any kind of doubts a person may have, not putting their name on it in a sense that they were made to do it because of this game, right? But in general, we have so many too nice people, which is that we do not say what we mean sometimes. And that actually harms even our software development process, because if we're not telling what we're thinking, just trying to people please, that's also not good.
I like that idea. The last time I was at actually I think it was the last time I was at a conference with you two. When I was talking about this, I came to this this realization, like as I was saying the line, that like ultimately what we're doing with a lot of these facilitation techniques is testing ideas. That's it, right? We test software, we test the things we build. We want to make sure it's not going to fall over, and as soon as people start using it, but we want to, and we need to test our ideas as well. Just because complex systems mean that no single view is privileged, that doesn't mean all anything goes. That doesn't mean all ideas and all experiments and hypotheses are equally valid. No, there are bad ideas, and what we can do and need to do, and what facilitation can really help, is help to shake out some of those bad ideas, the incoherent ideas, so that we can focus on the ones that at least have a chance of working, and or if they fail, of teaching us something.
I think reframing things in the context of play also reduces the stakes in that way, because it's not really failing. You just made a mistake, and you can do better in the next game or the next round. Whereas when you have a meeting and you make a decision and that decision turned out to be the wrong one, it can feel like there's something wrong with you because you made that decision. But I think that a lot of facilitating a workshop is defining the rules of play so that you can also ritualize it in that way. You can say, hey, anything that we say here, we're not going to hold you to it out there. So this is your time to actually tell us those wild ideas that you don't feel safe enough in even mentioning outside the sphere of play.
Yeah, definitely. And exploring those wild ideas is a way of activating different parts of your brain, right? There's a concept known as pattern entrainment, right? When we see things we're used to, we get you kind of imagine you drop something into a whirlpool, it kind of gets entrained in that pattern. Um, our minds do that. We see things we've seen before. Okay, this is a standard workshop. If someone's going through an agenda, boring, your brain kind of shuts off because you know how this is going to go. You know the pattern of these things. So things that can get you out of that space and get you to help you to explore novel ideas, whether it's play and games, or I mentioned one of my favorite techniques, future backwards. One step in that is you ask the team to, or ask the group to kind of plot a series of hypothetical events backwards. So they have to think backwards, which is another fun technique, because thinking backwards is harder. It takes more mental effort, so it activates different parts of your brain. But the other thing is, you say, as you're building this path backwards, you are allowed to invoke acts of God, right? So how do we get to this like dystopian state? It's totally okay to say that a meteor hit our headquarters, right? Like you can just come up with wild ideas, because forcing or giving them the opportunity just to play in that space takes them to that different place and helps open up the scanning range.
I'm actually thinking about dystopian scenarios. There's the Black Mirror test, which
What's
is
that?
another. Do you know the Black
I do
Mirror
know this one.
test
Yeah, good.
No,
for
what is
product?
that?
Good.
So we know the series, the Black Mirror, which are very
Love
dystopian.
it. Yeah.
How tech will like have the bad side to it. Um, and the Black Mirror test is a product technique. Imagine what is the worst thing that could happen to your product. Let's say you have an e-commerce website. Do the Black Mirror test. So just have a team brainstorm what's the worst scenario that could happen. I think that's a part of play a little bit in gamification when you are allowed to say all kinds of wild things, which not always are that wild because there could be some security actual concerns and risks that you unravel while doing this activity.
I also really like, along the same lines, liberating structures. I don't know if you've seen the website, but I also like that they have a bunch of different. They frame it as a menu of different ways to structure a workshop, basically. And there, some things are better than others. So this is like improv prototyping. Is some of it is very specific, and then they go into the detail of what exactly that involves, and then when it's good and when it's bad. And there's just a lot of ideas here, and a lot of them are based on the concept of play. They're not super structured. They're more, you know trying to make it so that it's not the traditional meeting.
Yeah, I like. I've used some of those techniques, and a, a couple of bits of advice I give to facilitators sometimes is plan less, but just have more options. And I like stuff like that where you have this menu, or I sometimes think of it kind of as a tool belt of options, a little toolkit that you can pull out as and when you need. Some of that just comes with experience. If you've facilitated enough different types of workshops, you can see a situation and be like, okay, I know what I need to pull out of my toolkit, or which of the options on this menu can be really useful. But not having a prescribed follow these steps in exactly this order is a really, really powerful thing.
I think I
I
see
love
such
it.
a Oh,
Go on.
sorry. Okay. I think I see a huge parallel between facilitation and understanding the software development as collaboration and play and experiments, because we're not setting it into stone. We're not making the final decision. I did not go to my silo and then came back and said, okay, this is what we are going to do for 10 years. We're somehow admitting it. We do not know things and they may change. And this is why also facilitation is so important, because we understand that this is a part of our daily life sometimes, to have these conversations which are uncomfortable sometimes, and but we can learn more from each other and improve eventually together.
The more that I dig into this topic of facilitation, the more I think, wait, I do this multiple times a week and it's in my role playing games. Because you do have to do a lot of facilitation, especially as the game master or the dungeon master, depending on the system you're playing. But also the improv aspect of it is really high. And I would love to run some sort of abbreviated game at the start of a workshop where you assign roles, but instead of saying you're the wizard, you're the barbarian, you say you're the developer, you're the tester. And oh, that's not what you actually do. Great, because now you have to put yourself in those shoes and see how you would act. And then other people get to say like, oh, that's what you think testers do. That's not how what we would do. And that's useful. That's useful information though. And because it's a game, like, people aren't going to take it as if they had just said this is what testers must do. It's kind of understood like, oh, you're just playing a game.
This makes me think of a very dark example of the
Okay.
prison and prisoners experiment years
Oh, wow.
ago, the social one, where
Stanford.
actually
Yeah.
regular people played prisoners and there was extreme cruelty. So I think that in general, roles can affect us a lot and the way we perceive them and the way we think what kind of power we have in something. So just gamifying something, we could unravel new sides of people.
Yeah. And
Worth
as a
noting.
facilitator,
No,
just to finish
go
that
on.
thought, I was just going to say that as a facilitator, maybe one of the more important roles that you might have is to be the one that makes sure that consent is something that is discussed and continually checked, because people can withhold consent at different stages, and that way you're also helping to make the place a little bit safer.
Sorry, I had to chime in and say the Stanford prison experiments in Bardo, largely discredited. Fantastic story, great, serious criticism on the research. Like, sorry, I have a
I
worm in
love
my brain
that.
that
Yeah,
no, it's
we
it's a
should take it
great
outside.
story. It's a great story, still some interesting stuff from that, but not very reproducible and a lot. Yeah, there's the whole books on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so just to close off, if there's somebody who maybe has never facilitated anything before and isn't really sure where to start, what would you both advise them to do?
I guess there's a couple of bits of advice that I usually give. Mentioned already, plan less, because this when you plan, you're adapting to a specific sequence of events, right? I expect A, then B, then C, then D to happen. But the whole point of engaging with people, with unpredictable, complex people, is that you're engaging. You're engaging in a complex system. You don't know what's going to happen, so instead build your adaptive capacity, build buffer time. Things will take longer than you expect, but also buffer in your plans, right? If something goes wrong or you don't get an outcome that you expected, be willing to change your plan. So kind of gradually building up your set of options over time. I say keep things a little bit messy. I do really like physical stickies, and like working on a wall, because they're really easy to pick up and move. There's a tactility to them, that invites them being picked up and moved, that you don't necessarily get with a nice, beautiful, pristine, digital setup. And otherwise, same I think for most things is just practice, right? Because it is unpredictable. Things can go wrong, and having some experience and kind of building out that toolkit of, hey, here, oh, there are 20 different formats I've run. Now I know when some of these might work and when some of them might not, and that takes time to build up. So it will initially be quite difficult, because unpredictable things will happen, but it gets easier with experience, like most things.
I would add also timekeeping. This is something as a facilitator you have to be fairly strict at. And sometimes you give, for example, 20 minutes for people to brainstorm on something. And there has to be a timer and you have to cut them off. And sometimes the most interesting point. And then you have to sometimes ask, okay, do we need more time or not? And overall, having this role, you may find yourself that you also have opinions, but it's not about you. It's about the people that are in the room. And I guess, accepting a little bit that there may not be an outcome and it's not really your fault. We are a one step closer to learning something more, collaborating. Maybe you will need more sessions in that. But basically, shaping your session, thinking what you want to tackle there. And as Steve said, you likely will need more time. So be ready for that. Yet also cut off discussions when you see that they're not adding more value. Nicole, what do you think?
I think probably I would say read the room. Your job there is not to be the one that people are looking at. Your job is to look at everybody else and see who needs to be invited back into the conversation, who tried to say something and immediately got shut down. Make sure that everybody is involved and pay attention to the cadence of the communication. If there are people that whose voices are always heard, maybe try to give voices to the other people. And also just relax. Like it's not about you, it's about everybody else. And have fun.
Yeah, those last two are really, really important bits of advice. Just have fun with it. And I've met a lot of people who say that they are very, very like nervous about facilitation, right? And I was also in the past before I got more experience at it. And the bit of advice I'll always give them is look, over the years I've facilitated hundreds and hundreds of workshops and all sorts of things, and so far nobody's died. So look,
Maybe they
it's not
have
that
though.
bad.
Yeah, just
Nobody
afterwards.
has, nobody's
Not
died
because of your
in
facilitation.
my workshop is the important point here. Okay. So look, unless you are an exceptionally bad facilitator, you're probably not going to kill anyone. So relax. Like, what's the worst that could happen?
All right. Well, we are over time. Thank you both for coming. I think it was great. Feel like we could keep going, but we are out of time. I will leave links to all of your things in the description as well. So if you want to get in contact with Steve or Lina, you'll find all of that in the description box below. Thank you both for coming, and thank you to everyone who's watching this now and afterwards as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.